From a pretty young age, I remember Juilliard being the dream and part of the goal and the path that was going to get me to performing around the world and so forth. So I think I always had that in my sights as where I wanted to be. But I don't think I ever imagined teaching at Juilliard, let alone in this sort of capacity. I don't really remember a time when I wasn't playing the violin growing up. I sat down once to try to estimate how much time had gone into music, and most people are probably familiar with the whole 10,000 hour expertise thing. I probably got to 10,000 hours when I was like in my early teens. I think we like to think oftentimes that there's like this singular moment where our trajectory changes. In my head at least, it feels to me that there were a bunch of little tiny nudges in a particular direction that I didn't really appreciate at the time that ended up kind of building momentum in this direction. My name is Noa Kageyama, and I am a performance psychologist, blogger, and creator. I think one of the earliest memories I have, I remember being nervous maybe for the first time at a Suzuki camp, just a summer camp where students take lessons and we perform in front of parents and friends. And there was this girl who went maybe 4 or 5 people before me, and she started having memory slips. Not just like one random little tiny mistake and you go on, but this is where she stopped. You know, her pianist would try to cue her and show her what she was supposed to play, and she'd play again. And then she'd stop again and get lost again. And this went on for quite a while. I'd never seen anything like that happen. It just never occurred to me that that's something that could happen on stage, and it looked pretty embarrassing and pretty awful. And then so I started thinking in my head, well, how does my piece go? And I couldn't remember. So I was like, oh crap, what do I do? Like, I don't have the music. Like, I started looking in the audience for my mom, and she's not gonna be able to help me. And fortunately I was 4 or 5, and so I didn't freak out for very long. I kind of forgot about it after the next person got up and played and everything went fine. So by the time it was my turn, it ended up being fine. But I think that's sort of like the moment that Pandora's box was opened, and I realized, oh, things could go kind of badly on stage and be kind of embarrassing. And from that moment onwards, I think once I knew that things could fall apart, nerves were pretty much a constant. So then I went to Juilliard for my master's, and that was the first time I experienced having to be a musician full-time. And I started to discover as I went through the program that something about that didn't feel quite right. I remember I was in this quartet. We had finished a particular performance and we were going to the deli, just joking about what we'd all do if we won the lottery. They all wanted to either start a record label or a performance series. They had all these creative ideas for how they would expand what they were doing. And my obvious answer was, well, I quit. Like, I wouldn't do this any longer. Because I had assumed that most musicians, if given the choice, winning the lottery, they would quit and they'd do something else. I don't know what. I just knew that I wouldn't continue to practice and play the violin. And so I was really surprised that that wasn't their immediate response as well. And so it made me wonder if I was maybe needing to rethink my current path. I was talking to my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, and she said, yeah, maybe you should rethink this, because no one ever said that you had to be a musician. Like, you've done this your whole life, but it's going to be fine if you don't. And I think hearing that from her was what I needed to hear at that time to kind of give myself permission to explore something different. And the only thing that I could think of that was intriguing to me was this field of performance psychology. I had been taking this performance psychology and sports psychology class, and I'd never heard of what this was before, and essentially changed my experience not just on stage, but in the practice room as well. I discovered that it was concrete, specific, actionable exercises, whether it's learning how to focus more effectively and how to keep your mind on track in a performance, no matter what's going on around you, or what it even means to focus on the music. Once those things started to become clear to me, that started to make me feel like, oh, there are very concrete, specific things that I can do on a day-to-day basis in the practice room. And I found it myself to be incredibly useful and life-changing in a lot of ways. I think the scariest conversation was with my parents. I wasn't sure how their reaction would be to this idea of me not pursuing music. Because it's not something that we'd ever talked about. It was just sort of assumed that that's the direction I would go in because I started so young and they had obviously invested so much time and energy into that as well. I just remember it was nighttime. I called them and I didn't say, hey, I want to quit. It was more like a gentle question of what would you think if I entertained the idea of maybe not going into music? And I just remember there being silence on the other side. And then what she said kind of surprised me. The gist of what she said was that, well, obviously you're going to live your life and be around in this world much longer than I or your dad will. So if there is something else that you would really be happy doing, you should probably do that thing. I started blogging probably in about 2009, but I didn't get much traffic, didn't have a mailing list, didn't know to start one. And for obvious reasons, it didn't really go anywhere. I think what was helpful is to read that marketing doesn't have to be this sort of slimy sales type stuff, but can really be centered around teaching and education, and that felt comfortable to me. You can find the medium that you feel most comfortable and natural in. And so for me, I don't feel very comfortable on video, to be honest, and audio is something that I've had to get more used to. But writing has always felt relatively natural and comfortable. So when I discovered that I was supposed to start a mailing list and email people directly, that didn't feel too much of a stretch for me. I think the moment I realized that maybe this could be something that paid a few bills and maybe more was when I had the first viral post. I'd never seen traffic like that on my website, and I started contemplating maybe making an online version of the course that I was already teaching. It took maybe 9 months of me working 12-hour days to try to put this thing together. And when I released it, I don't remember exactly how many people signed up, but it was enough to pay rent that month in New York City. And so I was like, wow, that's pretty awesome. And that started to grow, and from month to month and year to year continued to grow. And so now I don't have that waking up in the middle of the night worrying what's going to happen this month kind of feeling, because there's been enough evidence over the course of years that this is perhaps a viable way to make a living. But it did take a while for me to start to trust that maybe this is something that can work. Let's see. So how many of you have had a performance where you made a little mistake? In hindsight, maybe not that big a deal, but because you couldn't let go of it, it led to another mistake, and then just kind of snowballed from there. Yeah. So that's the stuff that we really want to be able to nip in the bud and prevent from happening. Unfortunately, the problem tends to be that we have a kind of an unproductive response to mistakes. And the key is to be able to kind of replace that default response with one that's a little more useful, a little more adaptive. So I don't know if this is true. There are certainly moments where I'll get an email from a random person thanking me for the blog post I'd written or the podcast episode that I've published. And I'll run into people at workshops who will say something that I wrote changed how they practiced and helped them getting into a school that they had been auditioning for or an orchestra that they had been dreaming of playing in. So really, I think of my job as trying to find out answers to all the questions that I would have found really helpful when I was 12 or 16 or 20, the stuff that past version of me would have appreciated.